The Imjin War offers us a fascinating window into how differently history is remembered or forgotten across cultures. For Americans, World War II looms large in national memory as the defining conflict with Japan. Yet few Americans realize that for Koreans, the Imjin War of the 1590s remains equally significant, representing the first of two devastating Japanese invasions that bookend Korean modern history, with Japan's 20th century colonization being the second. This vast difference in historical memory raises an intriguing question. What might have happened if Hideyoshi's grand ambition had succeeded? What if Japan had actually managed to conquer Ming China? The prospect seems far-fetched to modern observers. Ming China was the superpower of its day, with resources that dwarfed those of Japan. But history has seen smaller nations conquer vastly larger empires before. The Mongols, starting from a far less developed base than 16th century Japan, had conquered China just 3 centuries earlier. The Spanish, with forces smaller than Hideyoshi's army, had recently toppled the mighty Aztec and Inca empires in the Americas. Had Japan successfully conquered Ming China, world history might have unfolded along a dramatically different path. East Asia could have developed as a Japanese-dominated region centuries before Japan's 20th century attempts at creating the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. The technological and cultural knowledge of Ming China, combined with Japanese military prowess, might have created a power capable of resisting later Western imperialism in the region. But such success was always a remote possibility. Japan's invasion plan contained fatal flaws that virtually ensured its ultimate failure. Chief among these was logistics, the eternal challenge of pre-modern warfare. Supplying an invasion force across hundreds of miles of ocean presented nearly insurmountable difficulties in an age before modern transportation and communication. Admiral Yi's naval victories highlighted this vulnerability. By cutting Japanese supply lines at sea, he effectively stranded Japanese armies in hostile territory without reinforcements or provisions. The invasions succeeded initially because of superior Japanese military technology and tactics on land, but failed ultimately because of the impossibility of maintaining those armies so far from home. There was also a fundamental miscalculation in Hideyoshi's understanding of China itself. Ming China was not a small kingdom like Korea that could be overrun in a lightning campaign. It was a massive empire with resources and manpower that dwarfed Japan's capabilities. The Ming could lose multiple battles and still field new armies, while every Japanese casualty represented an increasingly irreplaceable loss. These practical limitations aside, Hideyoshi's ambition reveals a fascinating aspect of Japanese historical self-perception. Despite being an island nation on the periphery of East Asia, Japan has often seen itself as exceptional, a nation destined for regional leadership. This self-perception would resurface dramatically in the 20th century with equally catastrophic results. Indeed, the parallels between Hideyoshi's 16th century Korean campaigns and Japan's 20th century imperial expansion are striking. Both began with stunning initial victories that created an illusion of inevitable success. Both featured territorial ambitions that far exceeded Japan's actual capacity to achieve them. And both ended in defeat after initially promising begins, with devastating consequences for the region. The legacy of the Imjin War can still be felt in East Asian relations today. Korean museums prominently display artifacts related to Admiral Yi and the turtle ships, celebrating their nation's resistance against foreign invasion. The ear mound in Kyoto, where the severed ears and noses of Korean victims were enshrined, remains a point of diplomatic tension, despite now being maintained as a solemn memorial rather than a trophy of conquest. For Japan, the war represented both the high watermark of pre-modern military expansion and a prelude to centuries of self-imposed isolation. After Hideyoshi's death, his successor Tokugawa Ieyasu implemented the Sakoku policy, literally closed country, that would seal Japan off from most foreign contact until American Commodore Perry's Black Ships forced the country open in 1853. This period of isolation is often presented as a uniquely Japanese decision, but the experience of the failed Korean campaigns likely influenced this retreat from foreign engagement. Having attempted continental conquest and failed at tremendous cost, Japan turned inward to develop its distinct cultural identity, largely separated from mainland Asian influence for the first time. The technologies of warfare employed during the Imjin War also merit special attention. This conflict saw the most extensive use of firearms in East Asian warfare up to that time. The Japanese arquebus, called Tanegashima, after the island where Portuguese traders first introduced firearms to Japan, revolutionized East Asian warfare just as similar weapons transformed European battlefields. But unlike European powers, who continued developing firearms technology aggressively, Japan's isolation period saw relatively little advancement in military technology. When Japan reopened to the world in the mid-19th century, its military capabilities had fallen centuries behind Western powers, a gap that the Meiji Restoration government would work frantically to close. Admiral Yi Sun-sin's revolutionary turtle ships deserve particular attention as one of history's great technological innovations. Predating European ironclad warships by over 250 years, these armored vessels demonstrated principles of naval warfare that wouldn't become common in Western navies until the American Civil War. Yi's tactical genius in employing these unique vessels against numerically superior Japanese fleets stands among history's greatest examples of naval warfare. The Imjin War also provides fascinating insights into how cultural and technological transmission occurs even amid destructive conflict. The Japanese practice of forcibly relocating Korean artisans, printers, and scholars to Japan resulted in a significant transfer of knowledge that helped shape Japanese culture for centuries to come. Korean pottery techniques revolutionized Japanese ceramics. Korean printing methods using movable metal type, which Korea had developed independently before Gutenberg's similar innovation in Europe, enhanced Japanese publishing capabilities. Even Korean agricultural practices influenced Japanese farming methods in the following centuries. This pattern of cultural appropriation through conquest remains a sensitive topic in East Asian relations. Many traditional Japanese arts that are now considered quintessentially Japanese actually have Korean or Chinese origins, a fact that Japanese historical narratives have often downplayed or ignored. For Americans viewing East Asian geopolitics today, understanding the Imjin War provides crucial historical context. The modern tensions between Japan and Korea, which often puzzle American policymakers trying to build alliances among democratic East Asian nations, have roots in these centuries-old conflicts and their very different remembrances across national boundaries. When Koreans react strongly to perceived Japanese historical revisionism about 20th century colonization, they're drawing on memories that extend back not just decades, but centuries. Similarly, when Japanese conservatives argue for a more assertive military posture in regional affairs, they're unconsciously echoing ambitions that date back to Hideyoshi's continental designs. The catastrophic human cost of the Imjin War offers sobering parallels to modern conflicts. The estimated 1 million deaths, primarily Korean civilians, represented approximately 1/3 of Korea's total population at that time. By percentage of population, this would be equivalent to over 100 million American deaths today, a scale of devastation almost impossible to comprehend. These civilian casualties resulted not just from direct military action, but from the systemic collapse of society that follows in war's wake. Famine caused by disrupted agricultural production claimed countless lives. Disease spread among displaced populations. The social order that provided basic services disintegrated in many regions. In examining this devastating yet forgotten conflict, we're reminded that history's judgment often has little correlation with a war's actual significance or human cost. The Imjin War reshaped East Asia and claimed a staggering toll in human suffering, yet remains largely unknown in Western historical consciousness. For Korean society, the Imjin War marked a profound national trauma that would be followed by centuries of increasing isolation and vulnerability to foreign powers. The Joseon dynasty survived, but in a weakened state that would make it susceptible to later Japanese colonization in the early 20th century. The psychological impact of these sequential invasions, 4 centuries apart but connected in national memory, helps explain Korea's intense historical consciousness and sensitivity to potential foreign domination. For China, the experience of defending Korea against Japanese invasion established a pattern that would repeat in the 1930s, when China again found itself at war with Japanese expansionism. The Ming dynasty's successful defense of its Korean tributary state reinforced China's traditional view of itself as the center of a Sino-centric regional order, a self-perception that continues to influence Chinese foreign policy today. And for Japan, the failed invasions paradoxically helped consolidate national unity under the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for over 250 years. The peace and stability of the Tokugawa period allowed for the development of distinctive Japanese cultural forms and social structures that would define Japan into the modern era. The Imjin War's ultimate significance lies in what it reveals about the interconnected nature of East Asian history. Despite periods of isolation, the nations of this region have always influenced each other profoundly through cultural exchange, technological transfer, diplomatic relations, and yes, through warfare. The modern national identities of Korea, Japan, and China were all shaped in part by this massive conflict and its aftermath. For American viewers trying to understand East Asia's complex web of historical relationships and grievances, the Imjin War provides a perfect case study. It demonstrates how historical memory shapes modern international relations, how technological advantages can determine military outcomes, and how civilian populations bear the greatest burden in major conflicts. As we reflect on this forgotten war, we might also consider what other significant historical events have been erased from our common understanding simply because they occurred outside the West. History is not just what happened, but what we collectively remember and forget. By recovering these lost narratives, we gain a richer and more accurate understanding of our shared global past. The Imjin War reminds us that long before the Pacific War brought America and Japan into direct conflict, East Asia had experienced centuries of complex international relations, technological development, and unfortunately, devastating warfare. Understanding this deeper history helps us move beyond simplistic narratives and appreciate the full complexity of East Asian geopolitics. For Korea, the legacy of the Imjin War remains especially poignant. Admiral Yi Sun-sin has achieved an almost mythological status in Korean culture, representing the ideal of selfless patriotism in defense of the nation. His last words, "Do not announce my death. Beat the war drums. Advance," epitomize the spirit of sacrifice that Koreans have called upon during their many historical struggles against foreign domination. The turtle ship, Yi's revolutionary creation, appears on Korean currency and in countless cultural representations. An imposing statue of Admiral Yi dominates Seoul's central Gwanghwamun Square, where he symbolically stands guard over the Korean capital that he helped save from foreign occupation. For Koreans, Yi represents not just military genius, but the indomitable spirit of a nation that has repeatedly faced existential threats and survived. Hideyoshi's ambitious dream of conquering China ultimately failed, but it revealed both the remarkable capabilities and critical limitations of Japanese power projection in the pre-modern era. His campaign represents one of history's great what-ifs, a moment when the entire political configuration of East Asia hung in the balance, with profound implications for world history. Had Hideyoshi succeeded in conquering Ming China, East Asian, and indeed global history might have unfolded along a dramatically different path. Instead, his death and Japan's withdrawal from Korea preserved the traditional order for another 3 centuries, until the arrival of Western imperial powers would again throw East Asia into turmoil. As we conclude our exploration of this fascinating but forgotten conflict, we're reminded that history is rarely simple and never contained neatly within national boundaries. The reverberations of the Imjin War continue to echo through East Asian relations today, invisible to most Western observers, but profoundly significant to those who carry this historical memory. By recovering and understanding these forgotten battles, we gain not just knowledge of the past, but insight into the complex present and possible futures of one of the world's most dynamic and important regions. In an era when American strategic focus increasingly turns toward Asia, such historical understanding becomes not just academically interesting, but practically essential. The story of Hideyoshi's audacious gamble and Korea's desperate defense deserves to be remembered not just as an Asian historical curiosity, but as one of world history's pivotal moments, when the ambition of one extraordinary man nearly reshaped the destiny of an entire continent. Thank you for watching our documentary on Japan's forgotten battles. If you enjoyed learning about this fascinating chapter of history, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content exploring the hidden stories that shaped our world. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you in our next historical adventure.